In today's session 4, Dramatic Structure, 3-act, 8-sequence, we're going to tackle one of the most essential building blocks of cinematic storytelling: how to give your story a solid skeleton. If character is the beating heart, then structure is the spine that keeps the whole body upright. Here's what you'll learn in this lesson. First, you'll understand how the 3-act structure works, the timeless model that underpins almost every successful film. Then we'll refine that model into the 8-sequence structure, which gives you a more detailed roadmap. Together, we'll analyze how these models come alive in Ruben's flashback sequence in Pakistan, where tension escalates, step by step until it explodes into violence. Finally, you'll practice applying these principles by outlining your own 10-minute short film, hitting all the necessary beats without wasting a second of screen time. By the end of this class, you'll be able to look at any story, idea, yours or someone else's, and immediately see its skeleton. You'll know where the inciting incident belongs, how the midpoint raises the stakes, and how the climax delivers transformation. This is the kind of craft knowledge that separates amateurs from professionals. Before we dive in, a quick reminder. If you're finding these lessons valuable, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. That way, you won't miss the upcoming sessions where we'll go even deeper into step sheets, loglines, and eventually your first script pages. Now let's get started. Imagine your story as a journey. Act 1 is where you pack your bag and leave home. Act 2 is the treacherous road full of obstacles and surprises. And Act 3 is the showdown where you find out if the journey was worth it. Ready? Let's step into the architecture of storytelling. Ruben continued. I immediately called Roland and explained the situation. Roland was shocked for a moment after hearing about the poisoning, but he quickly started thinking of a solution. He couldn't afford to lose that €25 million deal. He told me, "All right, Ruben, the plans have changed. We can't risk waiting to send a new expert now. You'll have to go in their place." I asked in horror, "Me? But I have no expertise in mummies. How can I authenticate it?" Roland, in a firm tone that left no room for argument, replied, "You don't need to authenticate it. The intermediaries don't want anyone too involved. You just need to be present in front of them. You need to be next to the mummy and see that the sample collection takes place. The photos taken of the mummy and the sample we send must be sent to the experts in Germany so they can give their final opinion based on the images and the sample. Your presence as a live, trusted witness is enough for them to be sure such a mummy exists and it's not a scam. You did this for me, and now you have to see it through to the end." Ruben shook his head, his gaze somber. And that's how, for that diamond, I found myself in an unimaginable bind. Alone, in a hostile and illegal environment, with a heavy responsibility on my shoulders, heading towards something I knew nothing about, and with no one else there to verify it. Night in Balochistan, Ruben's narration to Maria. Ruben took a deep breath, as if he could still smell the dust and feel the exhaustion of those nights. After that poisoning incident at the hotel, which took out Dr. White and Victor, I knew there was no turning back. Roland had given the final word. Now you have to go in their place. My only option was to brace myself for the horrors ahead, the mysterious path, from village to border. That afternoon around 5 o'clock, a lean, local-looking man, whose face suggested deep roots in these regions and who was the trafficker's main contact, approached me. His face was hidden in the dim light of a lantern. Without a word, he handed me a piece of paper. It read in English, "Just come with me and ask no questions, for I can give no answers." The pungent smell of sweat and dust clung to his clothes. He had an old motorcycle, and I got on behind him. Its exhaust let out a grating wail with each acceleration, and our journey began. We drove for about half an hour into the desert, until we reached a small village, with only 5 or 6 mud brick buildings, lost in the middle of nowhere. I checked my phone there and saw no internet signal. I truly felt cut off from the world. The guide led me to a cool, simple house. They asked me to put on Balach local clothes and wait. A few minutes later, they brought me a simple meal, a fried egg with fresh local bread, cold buttermilk, and some local yogurt. I used gestures to ask the man accompanying me when we would leave. I pointed to my wristwatch to make myself internet here. The only means of communication was a satellite phone. We entered the caravanserai. The smell of old dust and ancient stones filled the air, and several men came to greet me. I hadn't seen their faces before, but I realized they were Roland's intermediaries. They explained in a dry tone, "Since there's no internet here, the moment you enter the Sardab basement and see the mummy, and while you take samples, it must all be filmed in your presence. Then we'll go to another location where you can communicate with Roland via the internet." I said we were supposed to have a direct video call so the specialists could see the mummy. They replied, "Currently, it's not possible to move the mummy, and this is the only option." I spoke to Roland via the satellite phone, and he firmly told me, "Do whatever they say, and just come back safe and sound." Moments of terror, waiting in the cellar, Ruben's story to Maria. Ruben took a deep breath, his eyes half closed, staring into the distance as if still reliving those breathless moments. In that hellish cellar, time had no meaning. There was only silence and the scent of decay and fear. Perhaps an hour had passed when I heard the low murmurs of the local contact speaking with the con from outside the room. Their voices faded in and out, but their tone had changed. There was no longer that initial subservience or humility. A chilling certainty settled in my gut. The deal was done. The money had been transferred. From Roland to the intermediary, and from the intermediary to the con. And with that dirty money, hitting their accounts, we, the witnesses, had now reached our expiration date. My heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird, wild and relentless. I felt there was no time left for us to live. Breathing became difficult. The cellar air seemed heavier than ever. The Khan suddenly made a subtle gesture to one of his men, a quick, ruthless signal. Then he himself stepped back a little, as if to distance himself from the unfolding spectacle. In that very instant, the air exploded with the deafening roar of automatic gunfire. It wasn't just a shot. It was a relentless, brutal hail of bullets that shook me to my core. My eyes were fixed on the spot where just seconds before, the local contact had been standing. He, the one who had dragged us this far, fell to the ground with a horrifying lurch. His body convulsed a few times, as if his wires had been cut, and his last breath escaped his throat with a muffled groan. His blood spread across the ancient stone floor of the cellar, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. The smell of death. A few minutes later, as the echoes of the shot subsided slightly, the chilling, ominous sound of shovels and picks began to cut through the silence. Thump, thump, scrape, scrape. Exactly the sound I'd heard in my worst nightmares. They were digging the earth. Moment. My entire body trembled. Not from the cold, but from a profound terror. Why didn't they kill me? The question screamed in my mind like molten lead. Why was I still alive? An insidious dread began to sprout in my thoughts. Maybe my time hasn't come yet. Perhaps I am the next mummy. The idea that they might keep me alive, like that dried mummy, for some sinister purpose was nauseating. Why wait? What terrible plan do they have for me? I was roughly shoved into a small, dark, windowless room nearby. My hands were still bound with rough, coarse rope. The air there was stifling and heavy, thick with dust and the metallic tang of fear. With immense effort, I struggled to my feet. In the corner of the room, there was a narrow, dusty slit, perhaps for ventilation or a sliver of light. I dragged myself towards it and peered out through that tiny opening. The sight that met my eyes turned my nightmare into reality. A large, freshly dug pit in the hard ground outside the cellar. The 3 lifeless bodies, disrespectfully, were dragged across the dusty earth and then unceremoniously tossed into the gaping maw of the pit. Then, shovels quickly went to work, covering them with layers of dirt, as if they wanted to erase them from the face of the earth and from memory. In that moment, my heart ached not for myself, but for the families of those 3 murdered men. Would they wait forever for their loved ones? Would they ever know that their bodies lay buried in this nameless desert? I was lost in these agonizing thoughts when suddenly a woman's piercing screams ripped through the deadly silence of the desert. It was a sound of pure terror, guttural and desperate, that made my hair stand on end. My body froze. Then, amidst the more familiar shouts of men, I heard it again, a cry for help, unmistakable in German. No! I silently shrieked in my mind, banging my head against the rough stone wall. No, this isn't real. It can't be! My eyes were glued to the scene outside the tiny window. From a different part of the ruins, she was being dragged. She struggled, her body limp one moment, fighting with all her might the next. They pulled her, kicking and screaming, until she abruptly disappeared into a room right next to mine, her cries suddenly muffled. It was Dr. Allison White, the archaeologist, the brilliant, composed woman who specialized in the silent dead, was now a screaming, living captive herself. My mind reeled. The terror was no longer abstract. It had a face, and that face was hers. Why was she here? How had she, after being poisoned, ended up in this living nightmare? Trapped in the labyrinth, waiting in the caravanserai, Reuben's story to Maria. Reuben's gaze remained fixed on some unseen horror, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. In that hellish cellar, time had no meaning. There was only silence and the scent of decay and fear. Perhaps an hour had passed when I heard the muffled whispers of the local, contact speaking with the Khan from outside the room. Their voices cut in and out, but their tone had shifted. The initial subservience and humility were gone. A chilling certainty settled deep in my gut. The deal was done. The money had been transferred. From Roland to the intermediary, and from the intermediary to the Khan. And with that dirty money, hitting their accounts, we, the witnesses, had now reached our expiration date. My heart hammered against my ribs like a frantic drum, wild and relentless. I felt there was no time left for us to live. Breathing became difficult. The air in the caravanserai room seemed heavier than ever. My wrists were numb with pain from the ropes, biting into my skin, as if blood no longer flowed through my veins. I was utterly helpless, truly at their mercy, trapped. There was nothing I could do. My mind, however, refused to be confined. I sat there dissecting every grim possibility. My thoughts raced, trying to piece together the horrifying puzzle of what was happening. My only connection to the outside world was the muffled sounds, filtering through the thick walls. The oppressive silence of the caravanserai was occasionally broken by the scuttling of a beetle in a corner or the distant rustle of wind sighing through the ruins, but any other sound was acutely amplified. Then the rhythmic thud-thud of shovels and picks began again, tearing through the suffocating silence. That ominous sound was the final blow to my inner peace. It was them, the Pakistani traffickers, digging once more. I managed to drag myself to the narrow, grimy slit that served as a window, peering out into the pre-dawn gloom. And there it was, right next to the fresh mass grave where they'd buried the 3 men. Another pit was being dug. A wave of pure, visceral terror washed over me, chilling me to the bone. Who was this grave for? My blood ran cold. Had I reached the end of my line? A horrifying realization dawned on me. I hadn't heard a single sound from Dr. White's room since they dragged her in. Had they killed her? No, it couldn't be. Why would they do such a thing? She was too valuable. But the silence. The longer it stretched, the more my fear grew. Time stretched. Moments turned into hours. and I didn't know how much of my life was left. The dread of my own helplessness, my inability to rescue her, to even know if she was alive, pushed me to the brink of madness. I pictured her, terrified, alone, perhaps enduring unimaginable things. It was a torment worse than any physical pain. I slumped into a corner of my cold, dark room, huddling against the rough stone walls, my bound hands pressed against my chest. I waited, every fiber of my being taut with anticipation, listening to the relentless digging outside. About half an hour passed, and then mercifully the sounds ceased. The grave was ready, but for whom? The question hung heavy in the air, a silent executioner. Hours crawled by, each one stretching into an advanced screenwriting class, analyzing the climax and descent in Reuben's Nightmare, Part 4. Welcome back. This segment marks a crucial shift in the narrative. We move from the setup and escalating mystery in the Turkish present to the climactic, high-stakes flashback that establishes Reuben's history as an action hero and justifies his deep trauma. This is a masterclass in using backstory to deepen character and raise the stakes of the main plot. Part 1. The escalation of the Pakistan mission. The first few paragraphs function as the direct consequence of the poisoning and Roland's manipulation. The hero's dilemma confirmed: Reuben is alone, unqualified, and entirely reliant on criminals. The line, alone in a hostile and illegal environment, with a heavy responsibility on my shoulders, heading towards something I knew nothing about, clearly defines his new, unwilling role as the protagonist of the Pakistani nightmare. The descent. The journey from the border town towards the interior is characterized by a gradual stripping away of civilization and safety. The guide, lean, local, silent, and intimidating. He functions as the initial gatekeeper to the dangerous world. Loss of communication. No internet signal. This is a crucial thriller convention that isolates the hero and increases vulnerability. The waiting. The agonizing wait until complete darkness builds suspense purely through pacing. Boredom and anticipation are used to emphasize Reuben's helplessness. The border crossing. The encounter with the Iranian border guards is the first major moment of immediate physical peril. Hiding and holding his breath makes the audience physically feel the danger of the illegal crossing. The destination, the caravanserai. The arrival at the caravanserai serves as the special world, the setting of the immediate conflict. Setting as character, the ancient abandoned caravanserai, with its dark and mysterious entrance and armed guards, immediately signals a hostile, lawless zone. The smell of old dust and ancient stones adds to the oppressive atmosphere. The final deception. The intermediaries immediately break the agreement for a live video call. They insist on filming a sample collection, confirming their intent to manipulate and control the narrative. Roland's final command, do whatever they say, and just come back safe and sound, is the hero's final, desperate instruction before communication is severed. Part 2. The climax of the flashback. Moments of terror, waiting in the cellar. This section is the true climax of the Pakistan story, where the emotional tension explodes into sudden, visceral action. The deal is done. Reveal. The shift in the local contact and Khan's tone is a masterful use of subtext and implication. The chilling certainty that the deal was done. The money had been transferred. And with that dirty money hitting their accounts, we, the witnesses, had now reached our expiration date is a classic thriller moment. The villain's motivation has been fulfilled, and the hero is expendable. Sudden violence, the catalyst. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire and the gruesome death of the local contact is an abrupt, shocking use of violence. This is the point of no return. The mission has devolved into murder. Screenwriting. Note: The sensory details, the lurching body, the spreading blood, the acrid smell of gunpowder are essential for a hard-hitting visual scene. The ominous sound, the start of the digging, thump thump, scrape scrape, is a brilliant use of sound motif. It links directly back to the worst nightmares mentioned in the previous segment, creating a horrifying symmetry between past trauma and present terror. The twist the witness remains. The central question of this sequence is, why didn't they kill me? This twist creates a new, more psychological layer of dread. Why am I still alive? The fear of being kept as the next mummy is a truly sinister twist. The horrific confirmation. Peering through the slit, Reuben witnesses the mass grave, cementing the ruthless brutality of his captors. The return of Dr. White. The sudden reappearance of Dr. White is a major narrative. Surprise and a significant escalation of the personal stakes. Sound as trigger. The woman's piercing screams followed by the cry in German immediately shatters. Reuben's emotional control. The new hostage, Dr. White, the composed intellectual expert, is now reduced to a screaming, living captive. This reintroduces her vulnerability and immediately gives Reuben a new objective: rescue the captive. This shifts his role from passive victim to potential rescuer. Part 3. The psychological descent, trapped in the labyrinth. This final section is dedicated to the psychological toll of the predicament and the rising sense of dread. The focus on helplessness. The repetition of details, bound hands, thick walls, muffled sounds, emphasizes Reuben's physical constraint and emotional torment. The unbearable silence. The silence after Dr. White is dragged away is used as a narrative weapon. The new pit being dug next to the fresh grave, combined with the silence from her room, forces Reuben to imagine the worst. Is the new grave for her or for me? Internal monologue. The focus shifts entirely inward. My mind was a chaotic storm. Anna and our unborn child. This reminds the audience of the high personal stakes that Roland's diamond deal forced upon him. His inability to act, to even know if Dr. White is alive, is his greatest torture. Conclusion. This entire flashback sequence serves to retrospectively define Reuben as a hero forged by trauma. His current courage in Turkey is now deeply justified by his past survival in Pakistan. The vivid details of the mass graves, the imminent death, and the sound of the digging explain the source of his chronic nightmares, making him a profound. This segment of the story, Reuben's solo journey, the dangerous border crossing, the arrival at the caravanserai, and the terrifying ambush and capture, is a masterful depiction of escalating conflict. It serves as perfect source material for our deep dive into dramatic structure. Here is the complete and comprehensive lesson for Session 4, Dramatic Structure, 3-act, 8 sequence. Based on the provided text, Session 4, Dramatic Structure, 3-act, 8 sequence. While the logline gives us the core idea, the dramatic structure gives us the map. Every effective screenplay adheres to a structure, with the most common being the 3-act structure, often refined, into the 8-sequence structure. This framework ensures your story has momentum, rising tension, and a satisfying conclusion. We will use the narrative of the Pakistan mission as the framework for this lesson, as it perfectly illustrates the escalation of conflict within the second act. 1. Act 1, Introduction and Inciting Incident. Act 1 sets up the world, introduces the protagonist, and establishes the stakes. It typically occupies the first 25% of your script. A. Introduction setup. The setup introduces the protagonist, Reuben, and their ordinary world. Setup, as seen in earlier text. Reuben is a successful businessman, a martial artist, a loving husband, and he is trying to secure a future for his pregnant wife. Anna. His ordinary world is haunted by nightmares but otherwise stable. B. Inciting incident, the call to action. This is the event that shatters the protagonist's ordinary world and propels them into the main conflict. Inciting incident, as established in earlier text. Reuben accepts the illegal Pakistan mission to get the €50,000 diamond for Anna. This is the moment of no return. See plot point 1, the lock-in. This is the major action that ends Act 1 and locks the protagonist into the main conflict, making retreat impossible. The logline is now in full force. Plot point 1 from the current text. Dr. White and Victor are poisoned, and Roland insists Reuben go alone. Reuben has no expertise, no backup, and no safe exit. His complaint, "I have no expertise in mummies," is met with Roland's ruthless demand, "You'll have to go in their place." The stakes, the $25 million deal, the diamond, are now entirely on Reuben's shoulders. The stakes are raised and the conflict is deepened. To Act 2, complication, midpoint, and rising action. Act 2 is the heart of the film, where the protagonist tries to achieve their goal but is constantly met with obstacles. It usually runs from the 25% mark to the 75% mark. This is the section defined by rising tension. A. Rising action and obstacles. Reuben faces a relentless series of escalating obstacles during his journey. The ominous silent guide and the grating motorcycle ride. The total isolation in the desert village with no internet signal. The agonizing wait until complete darkness. A period of intense psychological pressure. The harrowing escape from the Iranian border guards, where his heart might burst from his chest. This is a tangible, near-fatal obstacle. The abandonment by the Iranian escort and the handover to the armed Pakistani men, making him feel abandoned among wolves. B. The midpoint. Point of no return or crisis. The midpoint is a crucial scene around the 50% mark that often raises the stakes dramatically and/or changes the direction of the protagonist's goal. It often involves a seeming victory or a devastating setback. The midpoint from the current text. Arrival at the ancient, abandoned caravanserai and the realization of the communication barrier. The intermediaries refuse a direct video call, forcing Reuben to accept their terms, filming the sample collection without real-time expert verification. This confirms his total isolation and helplessness, forcing him to accept a flawed high-risk plan. The conflict shifts from getting to the mummy to surviving the encounter. See plot point 2, end of Act 2, point of utter despair. This is the darkest moment for the protagonist, where all hope seems lost and they are forced into the final, desperate action of Act 3. Plot point 2, from the current text. The Khan orders the ambush. The 3 men are murdered, and Reuben is forced to watch them dig the mass grave. The realization is immediate and brutal. We, the witnesses, had now reached our expiration date. This is not just a setback. It is a devastating, definitive defeat. His hope of a clean exit is gone. The final, terrible realization is that the grave being dug next to the mass grave is likely for him. He is trapped and utterly powerless, ushering in Act 3. See Act 3, climax and resolution. Act 3 is where the protagonist uses everything they've learned and endured to confront the final, ultimate obstacle. It takes up the final 25% of the script. A climax, the final confrontation. The climax is the highest point of action and tension, where the central conflict is resolved. Based on the text, the climax is being set up. Reuben, driven by the piercing German scream, must now escape his imprisonment and find a way to save the kidnapped. Dr. Allison White, whom he sees dragged into the room next to him. His goal shifts entirely, from completing the deal to survival and rescue. The climax will be his final, life or death battle against the Khan and his men in the caravanserai. B. Résolution, dénouement. The resolution shows the fallout of the climax and how the protagonist's world has changed, to be written in later parts of the story. Reuben escapes the caravanserai, perhaps with Dr. White, and returns home. The key is how he is changed. He is no longer just a husband seeking a diamond. He is a survivor with a new commitment to justice or a new understanding of his capacity for violence. Practice. Writing the outline for a 10-minute short film. Your assignment is to use the 3-act structure to design a compelling plot for a 10-minute short film. A 10-minute short typically has very concentrated acts. Logline, provide your own. Example, a shy, bullied high school student must overcome his fear of public speaking when his substitute teacher demands he perform a monologue or risk failing his final semester. Outline, Act 1, 2-3 minutes. Introduction. Introduce the protagonist and their core flaw, fear. Inciting incident. The event that forces the conflict. Plot point 1. The point of no return. Act 2, 5 to 6 minutes. Rising action. The protagonist attempts to solve the problem, creating obstacles and failures. Midpoint. A major change in the situation, a sudden success or a devastating setback. Plot point 2. The darkest moment, apparent defeat. Act 3, 1-2 minutes. Climax. The final confrontation action sequence. Resolution. The outcome and how the protagonist has changed. Prepare your 10-minute short film outline for review next session. Session 4. Dramatic structure, the 3-act paradigm, and the 8-sequence model. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our Screenwriting Workshop. Today we step into one of the most fundamental pillars of cinematic storytelling, structure. If character is the heart of a screenplay, structure is its skeleton. Without it, the body collapses into a shapeless mess. With it, we have form, rhythm, and dramatic momentum. Our focus today is on the 3-act structure and its more detailed companion, the 8-sequence model. By the end of this class, you'll not only understand these models, but also practice using them by drafting a short film outline of your own. Part 1. Why Structure Matters. Stories existed long before cinema. Myths, plays, novels, oral traditions. But cinema compresses time. A film has limited duration, usually between 90 and 120 minutes, and must engage the audience from beginning to end. Structure is the architect's blueprint that ensures we deliver a satisfying emotional journey. Think of structure as a contract between storyteller and audience. The audience expects certain beats, an introduction, conflict, escalation, resolution. They don't want predictability, but they do want coherence. Just as music has rhythm and poetry has meter, film has structure. Part 2. The 3-act structure. The 3-act structure is the classic model that underlies most successful films, from Casablanca to Parasite. Let's break it down. Act 1, a setup. The world, the characters, the inciting incident. Length, roughly 25% of the screenplay. In a 100-minute film, that's about 25 minutes. Purpose, introduce the world. Establish the protagonist, their goals, their flaws, and the central conflict. Key moment, the inciting incident. The event that disrupts normal life and demands action. Example. In The Matrix, Neo's ordinary world is disrupted when Morpheus contacts him, leading to the red pill, blue pill decision. That choice launches the narrative. Act 2, confrontation, escalation, obstacles, midpoint, crisis. Length, about 50% of the story. Purpose, the protagonist faces escalating obstacles. Stakes rise. Allies and enemies emerge. The protagonist grows, changes, and suffers. Key moments. First turning point. At the start of Act 2, the protagonist fully enters the new world of conflict. Midpoint. A central event that changes. The game. Either a false victory, or a devastating setback. Second turning point leads into Act 3, often a low point when everything seems lost. Example, in Finding Nemo, Marlin's journey across the ocean is filled with obstacles. But the midpoint shifts when he actually reaches Sydney. Hope turns real. Later, his lowest point is when he believes Nemo is dead. Act 3, resolution, climax, and denouement. Length, the final 20-25%. Purpose, deliver the climax, where the protagonist faces the ultimate test. Resolve the central conflict. Show transformation. Key moment, the climactic choice where the decides and acts in a way that defines their arc. Example, in Black Panther, T'Challa reclaims his throne, defeats Killmonger, and chooses to open Wakanda to the world, an act of transformation. Part 3, the 8-sequence model. The 3-act structure gives us the big picture, but professional screenwriters often need more detail. That's where the 8-sequence model comes in. Originally used in Hollywood's studio system, when films were divided into reels, it remains a useful way to structure a screenplay. Each sequence is roughly 10-15 minutes. Sequence 1, Act 1 setup. Introduce the protagonist, their ordinary world, and the story's tone. End with the inciting incident. Example, Harry Potter discovers he's a wizard. Sequence 2, Act 1, the new direction. The protagonist resists, debates, or hesitates. Ends with a turning point that propels them into Act 2. Example, Katniss volunteers for the Hunger Games. Point of no return. Sequence 3, Act Ia, early struggles. Protagonist encounters the first obstacles, learns the rules of the new world. Example, in The Devil Wears Prada, Andy tries to survive under Miranda's impossible standards. Sequence 4, Act Ia, first culmination. A small victory or a false sense of security. Ends with the first major plot twist. Example, Andy starts to succeed at her job, but at personal cost. Sequence 5, Act Ib, midpoint reversal. The game changes. Stakes rise. Often the antagonist gains ground. Example, in Jurassic Park, the power goes out and the dinosaurs escape. Midpoint disaster. Sequence 6, Act Ib, deeper struggles. The protagonist suffers defeats, doubts, and betrayals. Ends with the low point. Example, Luke Skywalker watches. Obi-Wan sacrifice himself in Star Wars, A New Hope. Sequence 7, Act 3, climax build. The protagonist regroups, finds inner strength, and prepares for the final confrontation. Example, Rocky trains for his climactic fight. Sequence 8, Act 3, final climax and resolution. The showdown. The protagonist faces the antagonist or the ultimate obstacle. Resolution follows. Example, Frodo destroys the ring in Mount Doom. Part 4, blending the models. Think of the 3-act structure as the skeleton, and the 8-sequence model as the muscles and joints. Together, they provide flexibility and detail. When planning your script, start with the 3 acts, then refine by breaking each act into sequences. For example, Act RER sequences 1 and 2, Act Tego or sequences 3, 4, 5, 6, Act 3, sequences 7 and 8. Part V, Practical Tools, the 10-minute short film exercise. Now let's make this real. A short film has no time for fluff. It must hit its beats efficiently. Yet the same structural principles apply. In a 10-minute short, you still need setup, conflict, climax, and resolution. It's just compressed. Exercise. Draft a short film outline. 1. Act Y, 2-3 minutes. Introduce your protagonist and their world in a single strong image. Deliver the inciting incident within the first 60-90 seconds. 2. Act 2, 5-6 minutes. Show your protagonist confronting obstacles. Introduce a midpoint twist that raises the stakes. Bring them to a low point. Act 3, 2 minutes. The climax. The protagonist makes their decisive action. A brief resolution to tie up emotional threads. Example, short film skeleton. Title: The Last Train Home. Act 1. A young woman misses the last train. Inciting incident. She sees a stranger drop a bag with something suspicious inside. Act 2. She debates what to do, follows the stranger, discovers the bag contains stolen evidence. Midpoint, the stranger notices her. Low point, he corners her in the empty station. Act 3. Climax. She uses the train's emergency system to trap him and alert the police. Resolution. Dawn breaks as she finally boards the first morning train. Relieved but changed. Part 6. Common mistakes to avoid. 1. Rushing the setup. Even in a short film, give us time to meet the character before throwing them into chaos. 2. Forgetting escalation. Conflict should not stay at the same level. It must intensify. Keen overstuffing Act 2. Keep it focused. Every obstacle must relate to the central conflict. 4. Weak climax. The climax must be decisive and emotionally resonant. 5. Too long a resolution. End cleanly, with the protagonist changed. Part 7. In-class writing exercise. Now, it's your turn. Spend 20 minutes sketching. Your own 10-minute, short film outline using the 3-act. Structure an 8-sequence. Model. Answer these prompts. 1. Who is your protagonist? What do they want? 2. What is the inciting incident? 3. What is the midpoint twist? 4. What is the climax? 5. How do we see the character changed at the end? Write this as a simple beat sheet, not full prose. Focus on clarity of structure. Part 8. The larger context. Once you master the short form, you'll be able to stretch it into a feature-length screenplay. Remember, structure is not a prison. It's scaffolding. Shakespeare, Kurosawa, Bong Joon-ho, Greta Gerwig, they all use structure, but they bend and play with it too. For now, internalize it. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes, until eventually you won't think of acts or sequences at all. You'll just feel the rhythm of the story. Closing thoughts. Structure is the invisible hand that guides the audience's emotions. A good screenplay feels inevitable in hindsight, but alive in the moment. That paradox, predictable, yet surprising, depends on how well you shape your acts and sequences. Your assignment. Complete your short film outline before our next class. Next session, we'll refine these outlines into log lines and step sheets, moving closer to full script pages.